This is probably going to be the start of a new series where I give quick tips and tricks to help understand certain aspects better about design, such as properly understanding some parts of our anatomy or psychology to help us a bit in designing or animating a character. So a bit more of a deep dive on one specific thing in a shortened video. This video is on eyes and some of their anatomy, reflexes, and our interpretations of them. When I mention frame counts, I'm using 24 frames per second as a reference. I also animated a model and rig from Fortnite to demonstrate some of what I'm talking about. I was able to put the model into Blender using a plugin called Fortnite Porting. I'll probably have a link in the description or in a pinned comment. Surprisingly, the model doesn't have any canine teeth, which is kind of weird. I don't know why they left that out. Some of the animation with it's kind of rough because I didn't use any reference, and I also did it pretty quickly. A like and a subscription would also mean a lot to me. So with that, we can get started.
Blink, 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 blinkety, blink, blink, blink.
Are you actually saying blink?
No! Blink, blink, blink.
Joker! That's enough.
Eyeballs are spherical for the most part, and they have muscles that pull on them to look around at stuff in our environments. It's even been theorized that humans evolved to have a larger amount of our sclera, the white of the eye, visible often, as comparing the iris to the white of the eye gives a clear sense of direction of where we look, which can be used as a form of communication, since humans are very social creatures. Take a look at other species like cats or gorillas. It's mostly iris. There's almost no white of the eye visible. Eyes have a lens that focuses light onto the back of it, where the retina is. This gives our brains signals and information that we can turn into our perception of sight. If the eye has been changed in shape, the perceived image will be blurry. A shortened eye means the light's focal point hits after the retina, so you get someone who's farsighted. A lengthened eye means the light's focal point hits before the retina, which means the person would be nearsighted. Although it's easy to think of the eye as a perfect sphere, it really isn't in reality. Our eyes have a cornea, a small, clear protrusion on top of where our irises are. You can really see it from the side profile. When it comes to our eyelids, humans will have either downturned, flat, or upturned angles to the eyes. This is largely dependent on where the corners of the eyes sit and is known as our canthal tilt, sometimes leading to droopy or almond-shaped eyes. Certain eye shapes are seen in only some parts of the world, but that's a different topic entirely. The cornea typically isn't represented often in character design or animation, which I'll cover later, but it is useful to know that it's there for a couple of reasons. Our corneas take up enough space on our eyeballs that it can have an impact on our eyelids. When we look around, our cornea puts a bit of force onto our eyelids, pushing the lid it's up against in the direction we look. When we look up or down, there's a tiny bit of friction and surface tension too, because the eye is kind of moist, so that the eyelids will also follow where we look that way too. When we blink, our top lids push down lightly on the cornea, so that you'll typically still see a bit of the iris as the lid comes down for about 1 frame. It's pretty rare to only see the white of the eye during a partway point of a blink, and it does look quite odd when we can see it. When animated, blinking happens over about 1 to 2 frames, maybe 3 to 4 if the character is drunk or tired. Our eyelids accelerate into and out of blinks, meaning when closing, the open position is favored, but when opening, the closed position is favored. Our face only really has a muscle for the upper lid to close, so it does about 80 to 90% of the work with a blink. The bottom eyelid is typically animated to move as well, but in reality, that movement comes from the surrounding muscles pushing up against it. There isn't a dedicated muscle for the bottom eyelid. Humans will typically blink during larger head movements as well, as it protects the eyes as well as it keeps them moist against the air. If you turn your head while keeping your eyes open in real life, you'll notice you typically resist the urge to blink, and your eyes also feel a bit drier after the movement. But when people are really focused or angry, during some head movements, they may keep their eyes open.
You see this look on my face? This will always mean it's time to shut up.
But
Sometimes characters are given an extra frame or two when the lids are closed during a blink to compress the lids even further, which is sometimes done during more explosive facial expression changes, which helps with the whole squash and stretch of the face. Humans don't always do full blinks though. Sometimes we do a little half blink that looks kind of like a twitch. It's another way to make a character feel alive without moving too much on them, but you probably don't want to do it too frequently because it'll look like they're tweaking out. The eye has 3 reflexes, which are classified as different movements. 2 of them are the same reflex, but done in different scenarios. The first is the basic eye dart, known as the saccade eye movement, which is actually the fastest muscle movement in our body. Eye darts are usually about 1 frame long. If they're 2 frames, it's the end position that's heavily favored. Eye darts happen about once every 4 to 6 frames, because if they start to happen any more frequently, we start to look like we're on uppers, or again, like we're tweaking out. When we turn to look at something new in our surroundings, we'll have a couple of eye darts before we settle on an object of focus, since we don't know exactly where to look, as well as we need a tiny bit of time to center our focus. The other types of eye movements are both known as smooth pursuit, which is when your eyes track an object during 2 different scenarios and actually counts as a neurological reflex. The first is when your head is still and the object is moving, and the other is when our head is moving and the object is still. When our eyes move around like this, they can sometimes push against the eyelid, like I mentioned earlier. In real life and animation, we'll usually use all three of these movements to look around or at something.
Finish your drink.
Yeah. I don't like it here anymore.
Iris sizes and pupils can also be used as a tool in character design, especially when different characters in a cast are given different eye shapes. These can also be used for temporary facial expressions. On the whole, humans feel more comfortable looking at faces with larger irises, because we see this feature in young offspring, and animals young are usually harmless, so again, we feel comfortable looking at them. We also prefer to look at faces with slightly more dilated pupils as well. This has to do with the fact that humans have a very primal link to the pupil size in our environments, and we subconsciously pick up on it. To start, yes. When it's dark out, our pupils dilate to let in more light, and constrict to let in less light in bright environments. But we have an uncontrollable reaction to the size of the pupil when looking at things we like or don't like. Over the course of about 6 to 8 frames, when we see something we like, our pupils will dilate a bit. This happens on a base subconscious level, and most people don't have control over it. So it happens when you look at cake, your wife, or your wife's cake. So we feel more comfortable looking at faces like this as we interpret it as the person liking us. The inverse is also true, that being our irises constrict when looking at something or someone we feel threatened by or dislike quite a bit. What this means is that more fierce or dangerous looking characters are given smaller irises and pupils, while more innocent and friendly characters are given larger irises and pupils. You can see this trend with lots of the heroes and villains in Disney movies. Also, yes, larger eyes are seen as more outwardly friendly compared to smaller eyes, which sometimes come off as more hostile or less trustworthy. Some art styles will stylize everyone to have a really small iris to the point where it becomes a black dot, which is fine. Typically, women in design are given larger eyes, irises, and pupils, as they invoke ideas of neoteny, which is also seen as more outwardly feminine, which is a whole other topic that I may get into with a different video. For example, Moira is the only woman in Overwatch to have a more normally proportioned set of eyes and irises. Even Zarya has large eyes. Meaning, in order for Zarya's facial proportions to be biologically feasible, since eyes grow very little as we age, she needed to be like 2 feet tall when she came out of the womb. Honestly, if you told me that, I may believe you, based on the size of Zarya. We also see slightly wider set eyes as more passive and friendly compared to narrow set eyes, which we interpret as more aggressive and hostile. Some characters are given oversized eyeballs, but the eyelids are made more naturally closed at rest, so it kind of minimizes the doe-eyed look that other characters in a cast may have, while still retaining the larger eyes. You can also mess with the eyes to throw people off, like a really large iris, but a really tiny pupil, and vice versa. Since we have 2 eyes and our points of focus can vary, our eyes will change position depending on the distance of our focus. When something is quite close to us, our eyes converge. When something is far away, our eyes will form pretty close to parallel lines. When in between those distances, there's an ever so slight convergence. When you lose one of your eyes, you actually lose this form of depth perception because your brain compares and contrasts the 2 images that it gets and is able to tell the depth from it. This depth perception only works from about like 0 to 20 meters. This is also known as binocular depth perception. And lots of animals that have eyes on the sides of their head don't have this form of depth perception.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Lots of 2D and 3D styles will change the eyes a bit to match their aesthetic. Like I mentioned, some styles will focus on that doe-eyed look for the characters, while others give them that tiny black iris, both of which are completely fine. Some styles will make the eyelid a flat 2D shape, while others have it illustrated in 3D space and account for the depth of the skin. Corneas are almost always never represented in most animated forms, as it adds a whole lot more complexity to animating the eyes. The only time I think I've seen it modeled in a game and not like a feature-length animation or something animated in a realistic art style is when Cyberpunk introduced their 2.0 update. The eyes were given seemingly modeled corneas, which they didn't have before. The eyeballs also looked more reflective too, like they updated the texture like one of the roughness or normal maps. But when you look at the characters from the side, you can see the cornea sticking out a bit, as well as you can see the light passing through it. Sometimes eyes are modeled to be a perfect sphere in the head, sometimes they're modeled to have more of a discus shape. In 3D animation, this can lead to the eyes getting buried in the socket when using the eye controls. So the eye movements have to be broken up and made a bit more asymmetrical to prevent that from happening. This also leads to eyes being animated to the camera lots of the time, which is a normal thing to do in feature-length animation, but less so in lots of game animation where you can spin the camera around the character. Lots of 2D, especially anime or Mo-based styles, will flatten the eye, especially from the side profile, so it isn't actually a spherical shape. The eyes can be so heavily stylized in a lot of different ways in 2D, which may need a standalone video to cover that. Like 3D, lots of anime faces are drawn in reference to the perspective of the camera, which means they break in 3D space. Which is one of the reasons why anime doesn't always transfer over the best when moving to 3D without any special programs to help deform the face. This is also why I think many art teachers don't want students drawing with many anime styles, as lots of the stylization to do with the face ends up not being anatomically correct from most perspectives, which is part of the art style, but it also means you can kind of cheat a lot easier. Granted, there's who knows why some teachers don't want people drawing like that, but that's a whole other video on its own. In reality, humans don't have this amount of structural variation with our eyeballs and irises. This is done as a tool of stylization. Most humans actually have eyeballs that are pretty close in size across every ethnicity. The difference in perceived size is from our eyelids and how deep the eyeball is in our sockets. You'll notice that once art styles start to represent something closer to reality, the more you stylize the eye, the more out of place the character looks, and it's almost like, what's wrong with you? Why do you look like that? That's the end of the video. I hope you guys learned something. With that, take care.
Hopefully we'll meet again someday. We could have a picnic. Just you and me, okay, mister?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.